as the government bill as soon as possible. And I think that's very, very important. And it is something that when I was canvassing this time 2 years ago around Kerry, that I was asked quite a lot about on the doorsteps. And it is very, very important to people. And I suppose when we think about it and we think about the overall global climate, the world is really a small place, and what we do here in this country does have an impact in many other countries. Likewise, what happens in other countries has a huge impact on us here, and we all have to play our part and pull our weight in the world. And I'm reminded of one of my very earliest memories being a young child in the mid-1980s, and at the time of the Chernobyl disaster, and sheep living on the mountain behind where I live dying as a result of that, which happened thousands of miles away. Well, it's an indication of really how small the world is when it comes to environmental issues and climate-related issues. And also as well, the deputy here to my left, I would have enjoyed a swim in Inch Beach during the summer, but with warming seawaters, it's been noticed in recent summers that we've been attracting some rather unusual specimens of jellyfish and other types of creatures that wouldn't have been seen in the waters off of Ireland before. And if that's not an indication of sea temperatures rising, what is? And, so it mightn't be so pleasant for Deputy Murphy to jump into the water off of Inch in future, should such a trend continue. But maybe that's something that Minister Hogan could address in the bill as well. But I have been asked by...
The minister is not responsible for the rain.
The jellyfish amendment. But I have been asked by people from my constituency to ask that the forthcoming bill would contain clearly defined targets for 2020 and 2050 to provide certainty surrounding government policy, 5-year carbon budgets that provide a clear pathway for emission reductions, and an independent expert committee to advise the government on climate change. These are requests that have been made by many constituents of mine, and I would like to refer them to Minister Hogan as well. So again, in conclusion, I would just like to commend Deputy Murphy for bringing this bill forward, and again I would like to call on Minister Hogan to do everything possible to try to progress the government bill as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I call on Deputy Doyle.
Thank you.
I'll let you know in 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, 5 minutes will be fine. I'd like to welcome the bill. I think and commend Deputy Murphy. I think anything that keeps this item on the agenda is to be welcomed. It opens up discussion on it. And just on the point of the Friday sittings and the Friday, this is somewhere in between the collegiate work that we do in committee and the more adversarial, normal 3-day week, normal engagement in the floor of the House here. I think the Minister and myself were both a member of the Climate Change and Energy Security Committee in the last Dáil. It was called that for a particular reason. I think the two are inextricably linked, and I think for that purpose, with that in mind, actually, we produced a number of pieces of draft legislation and work, one of which was a climate change heads bill, which was prepared by my then constituency colleague Deputy Liz McManus. We also produced a foreshore licence bill, which was to deal specifically with the wind energy offshore, to allow that to be expedited in a more timely fashion. It was seen that there was too many constraints, and a marine bill along the lines of what they were producing at the time in the House of Commons was seen as going to be laborious and extensive. To be fair to the last administration, I think they did intend bringing out their own climate change legislation. I think events superseded it and they ran out of time, basically. So I think it's not that this hasn't been intended. It hasn't been intended to bring in some proper climate change legislation. I think it's just it hasn't been done. I do think, and I say this, I do think regardless of whether climate change was an issue or not, we have to look to the future, how we are actually going to provide food and energy for a population that's growing and will grow by approximately 2 billion people in the next 40 years. I think no matter if the climate change was not an issue, and I think it is an issue, I think it's hard to get away from the evidence that says that mankind's lifestyle over the last 100 years has put extra pressure on the climate and on the resources. The world's resources, the Earth's resources are finite. We haven't developed another planet that we can actually move to if we wear this one out. So we have to live with it, and we have to live with it against challenges, in particular in where we can produce food, where we can produce fuel, and where we can get water. And they're the main ones. And there's things we're going to have to change no matter what else happens, regardless of climate change. And we have our targets, which are binding 2020, by 20, those are only up to 2020. We're sort of hitting some of them by virtue of the fact that we have a very slow economy. If, as we all hope, our economic fortunes improve, I think everybody would agree, the knock-on effect may be that some of those climate change targets will become more of a challenge. So I think we have to look at it in that context as well. And part of it will be our own lifestyle and our own lifestyle expectations, and we're going to have to manage that. I remember in one of those meetings we were asked, and this sounds provocative, should we introduce birth control in the African nations? And Justin Kilcullen was there, and he said, the carbon emissions from people on the African continent are 1/20th of what they are in Europe, and they're 1/40th of what they are in the United States. So he said, I wonder where should we introduce birth control? That was his challenge to us. So, we have to look on it. So we have to change our habits. But I come from a farming background, and I do believe that we've looked at things in individual silos. What we need to look at is how can we produce food and fuel in a way that is sustainable, that works with the earth. I believe we can do it, and I think we should look at a total resources policy, usage policy, which includes the wind, the waves, the soil. And very quickly, and I'll just bring it down to very simple, a cow who produces milk is also a producer of food, meat. If you feed that animal in the right way and look after that animal's nutrition, you can ensure that you reduce the amount of methane that one animal produces. One dairy company in China has 2 million cows supplied. That's the population of the whole herd in this country. And they are just pumping in stuff. They're the most, probably, and I don't mean to say this, critically, very inefficient in the way that they produce milk. They just pump in food and they turn out milk. If they could save, and it'll come down to money, if they could save 20 cents a day on 2 million cows, and they can save more, that's 400,000 a day in the equivalent of euros. But what they'll also do by doing that, by improving their efficiency, is they'll reduce the methane emissions from that animal, from those 2 million animals, significantly. And every little helps, to coin a phrase of a retail outlet that's been in the news for other reasons. And I think that's the way we have to look at it. This will be done in small increments, and it'll be done all over the place. So I think that's what we have to look at. And yes, climate changes, but as an eminent expert said at a summit some years ago, if we accept that mankind is responsible for this, and we have a train, in terms of slowing down that train, it'll take us 50 years to come to a stop, and it'll take us another 50 to go back. So bear that in mind in the context. And notwithstanding, that gets us back to Deputy Boyd Barrett's. I'm glad you're back, Deputy, because I looked with intrigue at your history lesson on the Faroes, and I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, here.
And
yours too.
But to be fair, I think we have to look at the here and now, how 7 to 9 billion people are actually going to cohabitate with the Earth itself. And I think climate change is a consequence. But I think the way we approach our interaction with the Earth itself, and I don't want to sound like I'm too much I could be accused of being in the wrong political party here if I'm not careful. But I do commend it because I feel passionately about this. I really feel...
We're all part of mankind.
Yeah, I really feel passionately that we can do this. We have agriculture, transport and industry. Let's not get caught on the percentages. I appeal to people not to take it as simplistically as that, because the big four nations of the EU have a heavy industry base. So their industry, their agriculture is significant, but not as significant as here is. We don't have. So if you have a smaller industry base, obviously